Blog Talk Radio.
Your life, don't you know there's friends to be found? Lift your eyes to see the world.
Welcome to the Sunbury Press Book Show, sponsored by Sunbury Press, publisher of books under 9 different imprints in a variety of categories, available worldwide wherever books are sold. I'm your host, Lawrence Knorr, the founder of Sunbury Press, and today I have Oliver Seneca, the author of When the Sky Goes Dark. I'll read you a little bit about When the Sky Goes Dark. Whether it's to finish college or muster up the courage to talk to the cute girl in his class, Jonathan Barnes wants nothing more than to make something of himself, to be a man and make it on his own, that is, if constantly questioning and racing mind lets him. After a sudden bloodied brawl on campus that leaves over half of Whitehaven College dead, John finds himself thrust into a world turned completely upside down by violence. The news is overwhelmed with reports of rioting across the country, plane crashes, and countless innocent lives lost. They say it's going global. With no explanation as to the cause of the nationwide catastrophes and a cryptic phone message from his parents, John has no choice but to traverse into the horror to find his loved ones. His family may be dead or worse, turned into rage-filled maniacs that pay no mercy to anyone or anything when night falls. Nothing is certain except for one thing. John wants to be inside when the sky goes dark. And that's the debut novel by Oliver Seneca. Oliver was born and raised in the suburbs of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. His first foray into storytelling came in high school when he was accepted to attend the Capital Area School for the Arts, where he focused on filmmaking. Oliver became passionate about writing after reading The Long Walk by Stephen King. Oliver's a graduate of Penn State. In addition to writing, he works at his family's law practice. Oliver Seneca, welcome to the Sunbury Press Book Show.
Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you so much for having me.
Wow, what an opening for this book. I'm terrified, especially with this coronavirus looming out there. And I don't want to have any spoilers or anything, but we'll get into the new book, the recently released novel, your first novel. But first, I was intrigued by the mention you call out The Long Walk by Stephen King. If I'm not mistaken, that was his first novel, although not the first novel published. So interesting parallel. Stephen King's first novel and yourself was your first novel out. But tell us a little bit about The Long Walk and why that got you interested in writing.
Yeah, so that was a book my brother recommended to me. I was not always into fiction books. I would usually read, I'd have to read for school and stuff like that, and, that can be kind of a drag. And casually, I would only read, about comedians and, funny little books like that. But my brother would always be reading Stephen King stuff, so he would recommend me his books. And I never really got around to read any of them early on, but he kept talking about The Long Walk. And I remember when I was at the store at 2nd and Charles in Harrisburg, I found it in the compilation with all the other Bachman novels that he wrote. And I said to myself, oh, yeah, that's that book my brother keeps recommending to me. So I picked it up. It was like $9, and I went home, and I started reading The Long Walk, and it hooked me in immediately. And it was one of the quickest I've ever read a book. I think I finished it in 2 days. And it was just so engaging and such a entertaining story that it inspired me that night to really try to get my own ideas out there. And it pretty much just changed my life in that I started reading fiction. I was, reading more Stephen King after that and other authors. And it's kind of a simple book. It's not very long, but the story and the characters are so good that it really changed everything for me.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't remember much about The Long Walk except that it's a contest, a walking contest where everyone dies, or just about everyone dies, or only one can survive, something like that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of like a metaphor for the rat race, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what's so interesting about it. There's definitely different themes and messages you can take away from it, and I just really I guess, woke something up in me to start putting my ideas on paper.
Now, was this after college, before college?
This was right after college.
Okay.
I had been really into films. I wanted to be a director when I was younger. At one point, I wanted to be a comedian and all that. So I've always had this desire to entertain or to be creative in some way, and it just kind of went to book writing, sort of overnight, almost like a light bulb went off in my head. You know, I read this and I realized, you know, there's a whole other world out there with fiction stories, and so yeah, it just kind of stopped there. So, you know, if it didn't work out with filmmaking and stand-up comedy or whatever, it seemed to I found my place with writing.
Well, I guess you could say with writing, it's something you can do whenever you're inspired, and whatever time of day, wherever you're at, you can take that inspiration and then start creating your story, and you can write whatever you want. Nobody's telling you what to write. So
yeah, absolutely.
But I was the filmmaking side of things is fascinating, and it would seem like, of course, writing is usually the first step before you begin shooting a film, unless you're creating something in the moment. What interests you about filmmaking? What were you trying to accomplish there, and do you have any plans in the future with that, or is that something you shelved at this point?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I mean, you never know. Anything could happen. You know, if this book gets turned into a movie, maybe I could have some hand in that. But it all started out when I was younger, about in maybe 4th or 5th grade. This is around the time YouTube was really starting to get popular, and I would watch skits and videos on there that inspired me to kind of do sketches and little goofy things, you know, with my friends and whatnot, and that snowballed into, you know, wanting to make more serious stuff, like thriller, suspenseful stuff, and I was always into watching movies myself. I have a massive DVD collection and all that. And then in high school, we found there's that CASA, Capital Area School for the Arts in Harrisburg, where for half the day I would go into Harrisburg to learn about editing with Final Cut Pro and script writing and all that stuff. So it kind of just went from comedy, you know, goofy little videos to, I want to see if I can maybe make a career out of this. But it didn't exactly work out that way. But I think filmmaking and all the films I've seen in my life definitely are a huge chunk of my inspiration as well. Other than, you know, Stephen King and the other fiction novels I've read. But yeah, you never know. It could come back around, depending on where things go with my stories. But I think for now I'll probably just have to stick with writing.
Yeah, I know when you talk about films, and especially the genre that you're writing in, some films that I've seen that come to mind when I'm thinking about your book, and I know your book has some very different undertones to it. I don't want to spoil it, but M. Night Shyamalan's movies, where there's this looming dread and something mysterious happening that is huge, but nobody knows what it is. You know, you seem to have tapped into something like that, almost like an old H.G. Wells War of the Worlds kind of approach to things. It's really gets its roots with H.P. Lovecraft, if you think about it. I don't know how much you know about H.P. Lovecraft, but
sure.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about some of the movies that maybe you think about when you think about When the Sky Goes Dark, maybe that helped inspire this, or at least gave you a spark.
Yep, absolutely. So there's a film that came out about 2006 called Carriers with Chris Pine, and that's about like a zombie outbreak. You know, people trying to get through, you know, driving through town with a car. They only have so much gas and all that stuff. I've definitely been inspired by the zombie genre. 28 Days Later comes to mind as well. But when it comes to the book, I didn't want to do straight up, you know, undead zombie things, but I definitely wanted to have that idea of there's a virus somewhere, there's an outbreak, you know, people are acting kind of funky, you know, they're not really sure where it's all coming from. So definitely 28 Days Later and Carriers and, you know, Night of the Living Dead, of course, the classic. There's just so many films out there, and even outside of film, believe it or not, there's some video games. I don't know if you've ever heard of Resident Evil. It's a popular series that has to do with like outbreaks and viruses and stuff like that. There's also a film adaptation of those games as well. So I kind of like put all that stuff together. You know, take inspiration, little elements from each thing, and kind of blend them up and try to put my own spin on it.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a couple books that we've published on our Verboten Books imprint. I won't mention who the author is, except to say the author is mysterious, and we're not quite sure. His name's Bram Stoker, and obviously it's a pseudonym for somebody, but it kind of plays on the fact that this whole zombie plague, it's been so popular in the popular culture, in the media, you know, in films and books and so on, and it kind of makes fun of it, but it takes it in a totally different way. It's called rated Z, you know, like a rated Z film is the lowest level of film.
Yeah.
Well, this is just meant to be both humorous and also have horror elements to it, and it's very different from what you've done. But I think it's interesting that we have a few of these different takes on calamitous plagues and what they can do. Yeah. So, have you been thinking about recent news and coronavirus at all when you think about your novel? Is there any connection you're making there?
Yep, absolutely. You know, that's going on, and that, you know, who knows what all that is, you know, has originated from. But I'm definitely thinking about that, and you never know how that will inspire, you know, other works coming out in the future. You know, it just goes to show, you know, although these outbreak stories, you know, they come out a lot. There's all kinds of stories about them, but that's because there's so many things in real life going on that we're not sure about. That'll always be that inspiration there. So coronavirus could be that could be When the Sky Goes Dark Volume 2. You never know.
There you go. Yeah, the other question I have for you, when I look at the description of your book, Whitehaven College stands out to me, just like blinking. Whitehaven College. Oh, come on, man. Could you name a college that's more obviously like, is it trying to send a message about comfortable people in a predominantly upper class privileged setting, or is that actually the name of the town, and like a town in Connecticut, or?
No, you know, that's interesting you say that. I actually never even really thought about it that way. No, you know, honestly, there's no underlying message there. At least, you know, not intentionally. That was just the name of the place. I just kind of came up with that. I think at one point it was like Red Haven. It might have even been like Harristown. I was just kind of throwing out different names there. But that's an interesting point that you make about that. I guess one could interpret it that way as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, we all, when you start to read things and look at things, you can psychoanalyze. You can do a lot of maybe overthinking sometimes with stuff.
Sure.
Hey, I thought it was great, and it kind of gave me that image, and I was imagining that dimension to it, like the world goes to hell in that kind of setting too, and you know, nobody's safe kind of thing. So
yeah.
It's an interesting angle to it. I think it's funny that you hadn't thought of it, but that's cool.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the book, at least as much as you can. You know, where is it set? And did you have in mind is there a real place that you've renamed, or you know, is it pretty much what you know around you, or did you invent a place that doesn't exist?
Sure. Yeah. So that's it's in Central PA. I went to college at Penn State Harrisburg, which definitely has some inspiration for Whitehaven. Just kind of like you know, a little college, just in a little Central PA town, kind of tucked away, and it was definitely inspired by my time there. I can't say that it's directly related, you know, for legalities. But there's definitely elements of places around, you know, the Harrisburg area, and then some rural places that I've visited growing up, in the story, when he's going home, he has to kind of go through this farmland, and that's based on some western Pennsylvania towns that I remember driving through growing up to see, my relatives and stuff like that. So there's a little bit of memory, childhood memory in there. There's a little bit of my educational location in there. But I think you'll always have to sprinkle in, stuff that to keep it fictitious.
Sure.
And at the same time, keeping it kind of real for, people around here that read the book. They might think like, oh, yeah, I know this place, or, oh, no, this character is based on me. And it's like, nah, not exactly. There's a little bit of everybody and everything in there, but, you just kind of sprinkle in a little bit of your personal stuff in there too. But, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's definitely inspired by the local area.
So Jonathan Barnes, is that, in your mind as you're writing, is that you, or is it somebody you aspire to be, somebody you knew? I know you can't say exactly, sure, but, maybe amalgamation of a few people.
Yep, absolutely. Honestly, I think if anybody ever writes a book, they're whether they know it or not, they're putting traits of themselves as the main character or a character in the book. So there's definitely a little bit of me and John, no doubt. But honestly, when I was first drafting the story, he was actually based off a friend of mine that I went to kindergarten with, who was kind of like a clumsy kid, kind of a nervous guy, nerdy guy. But I guess at the end of the day, I'm not too different from my childhood friend after all, because there's part of me in him as well, and of course friends and family members will have traits of them. You look at the relationship between Jonathan Barnes and his dad. Of course, there's going to be a little bit of my father and Mr. Barnes and stuff like that. So I think it's just inevitable when you create characters to not have yourself in there a little bit.
Well, having met your father on the phone, I'd have to say he's very proud of his son and very supportive and much appreciated. So hopefully Mr. Barnes and John have a pretty good relationship. Although I'm a little worried about absolutely. The cryptic phone message. and what happened
sure.
later in the story.
There's some scary stuff in there, yeah. You never know.
Well, I have to ask you, too. You kind of tease us with the book description and talk about his getting up the courage to talk to the cute girl in the class. So, did you?
Oh, me? I guess so. I think I'm like anybody else. There's always going to be some girl in class. There's always going to be some situation where it's like, I know I have an opportunity to say something. And for me, it's 50-50. I have done it, and, it's very nerve-wracking. And there's the other 50% where you don't do it and you kind of beat yourself up. But I've done it, and it's worked out. And other times I've been shot down. Sometimes they already have a boyfriend or whatever, and you just have to kind of get over that. So
I remember back in high school, and I'm dating myself. This is a long time ago, but I always had a crush on a certain girl in class. I won't mention any names, but a couple years after we graduated, we were at a reunion. Might have been our 5th year reunion, and she was there, and I sat down and we talked, and and I just jokingly said, hey, I had always wanted to ask you out. And she's like, well, why didn't you? And I said, well, I thought you wouldn't be interested. And she said, oh, my God, I would have said yes in a heartbeat. And I'm like, oh my God. But we were both married at that point in time and never saw each other again after that. But, the lesson is to younger guys or younger people, if you're interested in somebody for, to get to know them or to go on a date, don't be bashful. Maybe more than often they'll say no thank you, but if you don't ask, it'll never happen. Don't rely on it to happen by itself, right?
Yeah, so you always got to just see what's going on out there. You got to always try. I always say at least try.
Yeah, and I could go into a long story about Tammy, Mrs. Knorr now, and how we met and how I went out of my way to make sure that happened. And so, when you finally meet somebody that is just the greatest, the best that you've known, and you want to spend more time with that person. I by that age I was like, I'm not going to mess around anymore. You only get so many chances. So,
yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, that's fun. So, what are you working on now? What's coming up after When the Sky Goes Dark? Is there anything in the works?
Yep, absolutely. I'm always working on different drafts and stuff. I enjoy the genre of horror and thriller so much. I'm trying to kind of dabble in each of the different subgenres. So I'm working on, I have a paranormal one about a haunted school coming up. I have one that's kind of like a psychological horror. I'm working on one right now about witches and kind of like a gothic old age type horror. So I'm constantly coming up with ideas and trying to map out, different time frames to sit down and write the draft. So I have a lot of stuff in the vault. We just got to get it all ready to go. So stay tuned, everybody out
now,
there
do you
listening.
think there's an opportunity to do a series, a prequel, sequel, or are you thinking more like just different stories, completely different threads?
Yeah, when it comes to When the Sky Goes Dark, at this time I don't feel as though I want to do a direct sequel, but I will say that there's a character early on in the book named Skylar Doyle, the love interest of Jonathan Barnes. And she kind of goes off early on in the book, and we don't really find out what happens to her. So in my head, I guess they call it I call it a parallel sequel, in that, there's a story to be had with Skylar Doyle going on that takes place during the same time as what Jonathan Barnes is going through. So it's possible I could, get that one out there. I haven't written anything about that, but that, in terms of, any additional work in that world, that's all that I can think of at this time, is just to have that kind of that spiritual parallel sequel, I guess.
Yeah, that would be interesting too. So the other things you're working on are also horror as
Yep,
well?
absolutely, horror and thriller, and I was trying a little bit of sci-fi. I don't have many experiences with the sci-fi stories, so I'm kind of dabbling in that as well, trying to see about, maybe like the space sci-fi horror style thing. So we'll have to see how that all, manifests.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges when you jump from contemporary things that in the everyday world, and trying to explain what's happening to, all right, now we're in future, or we're in a totally different world with different technology and so on. It gets a little harder to, you gotta set up all kinds of rules and laws, and think about
exactly
what's the structure, how do things work, what's the technology, what's different, how do I describe that as a writer, and
yeah, exactly.
It's
exactly.
amazing. When it's well done, it's very entertaining and fun to read. Well, we have a few minutes to go here, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. I was wondering, with getting back to When the Sky Goes Dark, what have you been doing to promote? Have you been out talking anywhere? Have any events? How has it gone? Yeah,
I was just earlier this month, or I guess last month now, it's February 1st. At the beginning of January, I was on Good Day, PA. I got a little interview with Miss Amy Kime. She was nice to have me on, and I got that out there on the local news. And we're setting up some book tours around Camp Hill and Mechanicsburg and Harrisburg. We're going to try to go out to maybe Philadelphia and Pittsburgh to get those books out there in Barnes & Nobles and local bookstores and all that. So we're getting that all set up to promote. And also we've been just doing good promotion on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all that, and even Reddit. I don't know if you're familiar with Reddit. People on there have been really nice in the different horror subreddits and the writing community. So we're trying to fire on all cylinders here across digital and in person. So it's been going well.
I also often tell our authors that one of the best ways to promote your work is to write another book, and to do it in a timely way, because if you can have a rhythm to it and a regular release schedule, say one book a year, maybe even one every 6 months. Some people can do that, some can't. Sometimes it takes 2 years. Depends on your pace and how much time you put to things. But building that fan base
Wow.
through additional books is it's tough to do it with just one book. So
Yeah, that's sure.
I think you're getting a lot of mileage out of this first one, and certainly write it as far as you can. And great that you're working on other ideas. I can't wait to see them. Hopefully you present them to us to consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another idea I had for you was, I don't know if you've checked out the International Thriller Writers group, but they're always looking for members. I don't know what it costs. I don't belong to it, but a number of our authors do. And we're a recommended publisher through that organization. So
Oh, wow.
there's a lot of resources there. Maybe When the Sky Goes Dark doesn't get a lot of attention there, but maybe your next book would.
Okay,
And,
sure, yeah.
So, yeah. Well, what a great book. I think what I'll tell everyone who's listening, don't assume that this is your typical zombie plague kind of book. This is this is just a mounting sense of dread for an unknown reason, things going on, almost like Alfred Hitchcock or something like that, although in a contemporary way. And
Well, thank you.
Oliver, it's been great to have you on.
Absolutely,
everybody,
Lawrence. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we hope to have you back to talk about your next one.
Oh, for
All
sure.
Right. Everybody, thank you for listening to the Sunbury Press Book Show. We've been talking to Oliver Seneca, When the Sky Goes Dark.